This presentation will provide guidelines to ensure PowerPoints created are accessible. Designing accessible PowerPoints are easy and require some thought, planning, and knowledge. In this presentation, I will provide sample slides, address accessibility issues, show how to correct those issues, and finally provide additional guidelines and takeaways. The next couple of slides are from various presentations used by Empire State College's Office of Academic Support. These slides depict a typical format used to deliver content by this office. Here is my first example. This slide clearly has a visible and readable title, content, and an image. The text of the title is white, displayed on an orange background. This slide looks accessible. My second example, again, a visible and readable title and content, but no image. This slide appears to be accessible. My third slide, similar to my first slide, with one difference. Some content is bolded and underlined. Hint: notice the title as I proceed to the next slide. My fourth slide is a continuation from the previous slide. Again, notice the title. I altered this slide to show a different color title on the same orange background. Is this visible and readable? This slide includes the same characteristics as the previous slides, but includes a URL. My final slide represents all the characteristics of all the previous slides. This slide contains several visual elements. I presented several slides, and looking at these slides, some appear to be accessible, while some are questionable. To ensure all the slides are accessible, the accessibility checker should be performed. To perform the accessibility checker, go to Main Menu, select File, click on button that reads Check for Issues, which will display a list of options. Select Check Accessibility. The picture displayed reflects these steps. After this process has been performed, the checker will display a list of accessibility issues, the type of issues, and where those issues exist. For instance, slide X lacks X. In this case, the accessibility checker identified several issues with some of our slides, which are reflected in the picture. I will read the list of issues identified. The first issue pertains to the lack of descriptions for my pictures. The second addresses my links as being unclear and missing information. The third identifies identical titles. And the last issue highlights the order of the information on the slide as being out of order. Let's look at how to correct those issues. The first slide I displayed appears to be accessible. However, the slide is not accessible. My image lacks a description which is needed for a screen reader to read to an individual who is visually impaired. Without a description, the image has no value to the individual. Therefore, every image, regardless if the image adds value, requires a description. To add a description, right-click on the picture, select Format, choose Alt Text option, add a title and description if necessary. Now, when the screen reader arrives at the picture, the title and description will be read to the individual. The second issue on the list identifies various slides that lack a description for URLs. I presented two slides. To correct this issue, highlight the link, select Insert on the menu bar, choose Hyperlink to edit link, add a description in the Text to Display dialog box, and if necessary, provide more detailed information by selecting Screen Tip. The picture shown reflects these exact steps. The following two slides reflect those corrections. The link on this slide reflects an appropriate descriptive link, learningstylesonline.com, overview of learning styles. Before, just the URL address was displayed, providing little information about the link. Now, when the screen reader arrives at the URL, the description will provide greater clarity about the link. Like the previous slide, the URL on this slide lacked a description for the link. Again, the URL address was replaced with a description of what the link is and where the link is taking the individual. The URL description now reads, Assignment Calculator located at the University of Connecticut's website, which is much clearer than the URL address. The third issue on the list identified two slides with duplicate titles. Duplicate titles can pose navigational and comprehension issues. Individuals might think slides are repeating. The next two slides reflect identical titles and the corrections. This slide and the following slide reflect appropriate corrections. There are several ways to correct this issue. I could have altered one of the titles or add continue, but I chose to add Part 1 and Part 2 to indicate the topic is being covered over 2 slides. This slide now reads Part 1, Identifying Issues. The second slide reads Part 2, Identifying Issues. Titles are now clear, and the individual will not be confused or question if a slide is repeating. The last issue on the list identified several slides where the order of the information on the slide appeared to be out of order. If the information is incorrectly ordered, the screen reader will read the information as is presented, causing confusion to the individual. The order needs to make sense. For instance, one slide had the title last. The title should be first so the individual has an idea of what will be covered on that slide. To correct, go to the Home tab, select Arrange, choose Selection Pane, and arrange the content on slide as identified by the accessibility checker. The example shown reflects a slide I corrected the order, with the order as follows: Title 1, Picture 3, and Text Placeholder 2, which is the content. There were slides with no accessibility issues, and I thought it was important to identify those slides. This slide passed the accessibility check. One could argue it is boring, and visually speaking it is. A picture could be added as long as a description accompanied the image to add visual appeal, but I chose not to insert a picture. Another issue someone could raise is a slide contains too much text. The text could be broken up if that makes sense. The rule of thumb is to present small chunks of information, and 1 to 2 sentences as information presented in this format are easily read and comprehended. Here is another accessible slide. The font style and size is appropriate and easy to read. The font size displayed is 24, but 18 could have been used. Font size 18 is a recommended size for PowerPoint presentations. Also noticed the title is white against an orange background. The text is clear and not visibly difficult to read. Most of the slides I presented used white text on an orange background. I have provided slides that were identified as inaccessible and those that were accessible. What about the slides that were not identified as having accessibility issues? There were 2 slides that fall into this category, and this is where it is important to know what is and isn't accessible. This slide had some visual conflicts. The picture behind the text is competing with the main content of the slide, making it difficult to read the main text. The image itself is adding no value, is washed out, making it hard to read, and the image is complex. I would recommend replacing this image with another image and breaking up the content over 2 slides, or not adding an image as there are 8 points of information on the slide. Also, a text box is used to display the URL. The accessibility checker did not catch this issue. This slide, with a red title on an orange background, is difficult to read. The colors are not contrasting enough. White or black are appropriate colors, as a contrast will provide easy reading. The next 2 slides I've listed some other guidelines to follow. These guidelines, along with examples I presented, will make your PowerPoints accessible. This slide lists 5 guidelines. The first pertains to using animations and transitions. These should be avoided as they are problematic to various types of learning disabilities and honestly are not necessary. The second guideline applies to using closed captions. Always use closed captions, and if not an option but open is, then use open. The third guideline addresses the need to keep it simple. Simple is the best rule of thumb. The fourth guideline speaks to the use of PowerPoint's layout options or templates. Use PowerPoint standard layouts and templates will ensure the format is consistent throughout the presentation, making it easy for the viewer to navigate the presentation. Further, using these built-in options, time will be saved as accessible modifications will not be necessary. The last guideline points out that color contrast needs to be crisp and readable, and images, if difficult to decipher due to contrast, should be avoided or modified to ensure readability. This slide lists the last 4 guidelines. The first guideline relates to adding text boxes. Text boxes should be avoided as some screen readers are unable to access those boxes. The second guideline states that all complex graphs and tables require description and explanation for easy comprehension and navigation. This is especially important if a table is large, which leads me to the third guideline regarding table size and headers. All tables, if possible, should be of reasonable size. smaller being preferred. Headers should accompany all tables to identify data in both rows and columns. A table will be easier to navigate and understand if size is reasonable and headers are included. The last guideline referenced the need to include an audio and/or transcript. Providing an audio is another great way to introduce another modality to convey and accompany a PowerPoint, which consists of static information and no verbal explanation. As for a transcript, always providing a transcript can never hurt. My final two words are navigation and comprehension. Remember, all viewers, regardless of their disability, should be able to navigate a document without barriers or difficulty. Additionally, the document should be easy to understand so meaningful connections can be made and learning can be accomplished. If this mindset, along with the several examples and guidelines reflected, are integrated into your best practices, your PowerPoint presentations will be accessible to everyone.